So in a previous video covering the change in equipment from clones to Stormtroopers, I was pretty harsh on the Stormtrooper armor, and a few people left some comments about it. Some of them made some really excellent points and others not so much, but all of them made me feel like perhaps I needed to expand upon my previous presentation. So in this video, I'm going to be doing just that and addressing the main concern of the comment section. Let's talk about the Stormtrooper armor survivability. In the previous video, I briefly passed over the claim that Stormtrooper armor can withstand most forms of blaster fire with the exception of high-powered weaponry. This claim is heavily supported by Lucasfilm documentation as well as later source books and novels. Specifically, the documents state that the Stormtrooper armor has an advanced ability to distribute energy from a blaster bolt across a wide area of the body, possibly saving the life of the trooper wearing the armor in the event of a direct hit. The shot would obviously still deal a ton of damage to the trooper, likely rendering them unconscious from the shock of that much energy hitting the body. But if the armor is performing as it should, the trooper would still be alive. This is actually demonstrated quite well and quite frequently in the TV series Star Wars Rebels, where nearly every trooper seems to survive being shot, at least in the early seasons. Now, this is a show targeted at kids, so it makes sense that there would be effort to limit the amount of death shown on screen, but that never stopped the Clone Wars. And we can't just discount the evidence because it comes from a show for kids. Besides, in later seasons, Chopper straight up exterminates people, so Rebels is definitely not pulling its punches all the time. So with this evidence and lore in mind, it's reasonable to say that most of the Stormtroopers we see getting shot on screen actually survive, making Stormtrooper armor great. But there's just as much evidence against that point as there is for it, and for that, we turn to the Old Testament of Star Wars lore, the scripts. From the very first appearance of Stormtroopers in A New Hope, they're repeatedly shown falling to blaster fire. Admittedly, some of these casualties have at least the potential for survival, though I would argue that the two troopers laid to rest at the feet of Darth Vader probably didn't make it. I mean, why aren't they receiving medical care? But anyways, the script doesn't explicitly say whether they're dead or alive, so they could be either. However, things get a lot more clear in some later scenes. For instance, in the scene where the heroes are reboarding the Falcon while Obi-Wan distracts Vader, at least one Stormtrooper is most definitely dead. Quote, "The Stormtroopers turn towards Luke and begin firing at him. The robots are already moving up the ramp into the Millennium Falcon, while Luke, transfixed by anger and awe, returns their fire. Solo joins in the laser fire. Vader looks up and advances toward them as one of his troopers is struck down. Luke fires his pistol at the door control panel and it explodes. The door begins to slide shut. 3 troopers charge forward, firing laser bolts as the door slides to a close behind them, shutting Vader and the other troopers out of the docking bay. A Stormtrooper lies dead at the feet of his onrushing compatriots. Luke starts advancing for the troops as Solo and Leia move up the ramp into the pirate ship. He fires, hitting a Stormtrooper who crumbles to the ground." That trooper didn't make it. And the way it's stated shows a lot about the intentions of Lucas and his team with regards to the Stormtroopers. This is a scene where consequences of lashing out in anger are made very clear, and the deadliness of the weapon Luke is using are shown explicitly in the text. It functions as a subtle warning against the dark side as far as the movie is concerned, but for all of us in this discussion, it's very useful information to consider. This detail was added intentionally by Lucas for the cast and crew. For the audience, it's simply another flash and a Stormtrooper drops. So transitioning to another movie, there's this scene from Empire Strikes Back as Lando, Leia, and Chewbacca are escaping Cloud City. Quote, "Leia and Chewbacca start firing at the Stormtroopers as Lando makes a break for the elevator. Laser bolts continue to explode around the princess and the Wookiee, but they refuse to budge. Lando sticks his head out of the elevator and motions for the pair to run, but they barely notice. They seem possessed, transported, as all the frustration of captivity and anger of loss pour through their death-dealing weapons." In this scene, Leia and Chewie want nothing more than to kill the Stormtroopers attacking them, the troopers who represent everything the Empire has taken from them. And it seems like their desire is fulfilled as the troopers in this scene crumple after being shot. Now, they technically might be alive, but Lucas does not often refer to blasters as death-dealing weapons, usually just laser guns or laser bolts. So language in this scene seems pretty clear that those troopers are not waking up. Of course, in both of these scenes, the weapon that killed the Stormtrooper was the very same weapon the Stormtroopers carry, the E11 blaster. And while I personally do not believe that the E11 should be considered a high-power weapon, since it's entirely the antithesis to that weapon's design goals, it is still a military-grade blaster, so it's possible that that explains why it was able to penetrate the armor. So let's look at another example, one that I briefly referenced in the previous video. In this scene, Leia is hit by a glancing shot from an E-11, which fails to kill her or render her unconscious. It does put her on the ground though, providing a distraction that the Stormtroopers use to approach. As they demand she and Han surrender, she draws her Defender sporting pistol and kills both the troopers. Quote, "Hands up! Stand up!" Han slowly turns, revealing the gun in Leia's hand as she disposes of the Stormtroopers in a flash. Now, it could be argued that dispose could simply be referring to removing the troopers as obstacles, and the troopers are still alive. Not that I'd want to survive in this situation just to wake up hours later in a dark forest full of flesh-eating teddy bears, but the possibility still remains. So for the sake of fairness, let's look at one more example, the scene in Rogue One where Cassian gets caught meeting an informant by two patrolling troopers. Quote, "A pair of Stormtroopers appear in the alleyway. What's all this? Come on, let's see some scan docs." "Yes, of course, my gloves." Cassian pulls a blaster and kills the Stormtroopers. That's a text description, and there's really no wiggle room on that one. So if some of the lore is very clear that the Stormtrooper armor is excellent and it gives the wearers tremendously more survivability than they otherwise would possess, but other parts of the lore treat the Stormtroopers as disposable goons able to be taken down with a simple rock to the helmet, how do we reconcile those two perspectives? We can't just write off either perspective, as both have a lot of evidence backing them up. Some people might turn to the concept of plot and say whatever the plot needs will happen, so none of it matters. Which sounds a bit dismissive, but might actually make some sense in the Star Wars universe if you think about it in terms of the Force. Because it's actually very true that in Star Wars, all will be as the Force wills it, and the Force is usually on the side of our heroes. However, I think there might be something else at play, and I mentioned in the previous video, I think the reason why Stormtrooper armor performance varies so widely is because of how it's manufactured. Imperial military equipment is usually made in poor-built factories using low-quality materials and forced labor by corrupt companies looking to make a quick buck by cheating on Imperial contracts. This kind of corruption is seen everywhere in Imperial equipment, from TIE fighters to speeder bikes, so there's no reason to think that Stormtrooper armor would be an exception to the plague on the Imperial procurement. So what is likely contributing to or outright explaining the problems with the Stormtrooper armor is this poor quality of manufacture. If the Force Laborers did a good job and you got lucky to be one of the troopers who was issued a good suit of armor, you can probably take a bunch of shots and still survive, the armor saving your life. But if you're the unlucky guy who got issued a piece of bantha poodoo by a rebel sympathizer on a garbage planet, even a single shot from a civilian sporting pistol might be all it takes to make you one with the Force. I hope this clarified my position on Imperial armor, and if you're one of the many people who commented on our previous video, thank you. We always like to see people keeping us honest and pointing out if something was stated wrong or poorly in one of our presentations. Plus, we really like to see people passionate about what we're doing, and if nothing else, I can definitely say that I saw passion in the comment section this last week. We're not going to stop making videos anytime soon, and I hope we can keep bringing you accurate, awesome Star Wars lore for many years to come. So if you see something wrong in one of our future videos, feel free to let us know in the comments down below. Just try to keep it civil. Until then, I have been Sam, and this has been College of Lore. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.